Hello and welcome to Adapt or Perish, episode 44, Jane Eyre, Part 2. We hope you enjoy this, the second part of our extended look at Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. But before we get to that, as always, let's talk about our next episode. Father's Day is coming up, and we wanted to celebrate with a look at something appropriate. So, what could be more appropriate than Father of the Bride? We read Edward Streeter's original 1949 comic novel and watched its two filmed adaptations starring Spencer Tracy in 1950 and Steve Martin in 1991. But we didn't stop there. We also watched the sequels to both of those movies, 1951's Father's Little Dividend and 1995's less creatively named Father of the Bride Part 2. Next episode, we're all about weddings and babies and dads and Canadian national treasure Martin Short. That'll be out on Tuesday, June 18th. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections that you'd like to hear on the show, remember to email adaptorperishcast@gmail.com or tweet at us using the AdaptCast hashtag. You can find all of the show notes from this and other episodes at adaptorperishcast.com. And with that, on with the show, Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, Part 2. Welcome to Adapt or Perish, a podcast about adaptation. My name is Jeremy Latour.
And I'm Arielle Lipshaw. Welcome back.
As always, welcome back. Specifically this time, though, welcome back.
Welcome to our first ever part 2.
Oh my goodness, it feels so weird.
Yes.
Like an intentional part 2.
I know, it's very strange.
Like for all of you, it's been 2 weeks. For us, it's been 10 minutes.
Literally 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. Okay, well, let's recap. So
Okay.
Previously on Adapt or Perish, we talked about the 1847 book Jane Eyre, written by Charlotte Brontë, and we also discussed the first 4 of 8 versions that we will be discussing by the end of this episode.
That is correct.
So we started with a 1943 movie starring Joan Fontaine as Jane and Orson Welles as Rochester. We then moved to the 1970 TV movie starring Susanna York as Jane and George C. Scott as Rochester. Then, in 1973 was our first miniseries that starred Saoirse Cusack as Jane and Michael Jaston as Rochester. And then finally, a 1983 miniseries starring Zella Clark as Jane and Timothy Dalton as Rochester.
Yes. So if you want to hear what we think about any of those, you need to go listen to last week's episode.
Yeah, but I think the quick version was the best one was 1983.
Yeah.
Zella Clark was our favorite Jane. So 2 things that came up in the last episode that I do want to reiterate now in this episode.
Go for it.
One, as we said in the last one, I can't imagine anyone's listening to this one that didn't listen to part 1, but just in case for some reason you only want to listen to this one and not part 1, we are going to spoil a pretty major part of the plot of Jane Eyre. So if you've never seen any version of it, read it or watch at least one of them before continuing.
Yes.
I
Disclaimer over.
for the one person that's doing that.
Don't worry about it.
Like, if anyone's doing that and you think, oh, I must be one of a lot, like, no, you're the only one. I'm talking to you directly, listener. Second thing is this. We're looking at movies and we're looking at miniseries. Our opinion is that one of those is not inherently better than the other as a way to tell the story of Jane Eyre.
Yes.
I think that's worth repeating.
Yes, because I don't think in the previous episode we talked about 2 movies and 2 miniseries, and it just so happened that we thought both miniseries were better than both movies, but we are actually about to talk about a movie that we think did a good job
Yes.
to tell this story.
Right. So, shall we move on?
Let's move on.
To 1996, and this was Franco Zeffirelli's Jane Eyre.
I have what might be a controversial opinion.
What is your controversial opinion about this?
Franco Zeffirelli seems like he knows what he's doing.
Yes. Well, here's the deal. I think this might be controversial in that this is not generally viewed as a good version of Jane Eyre.
Well, that's incorrect. But what I'm saying is it seems like if you want a really lush, beautiful depiction of like a classic tale with beautiful music and scenery, this seems to be like your go-to guy.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've done a Zeffirelli film before.
And a lot of the same stuff we found in Romeo and Juliet came up again here as a strength of his direction, as a strength of his filmmaking.
Yeah.
So this was directed by him. Also, just like Romeo and Juliet, it was co-written by him.
Okay.
Well, that's one of the things I like about him. I like a director that's also a writer. I like someone that's kind of looking at every part of it. We do have a very good cast.
Yeah.
Let's start with Little Jane.
Dear little Anna Paquin with her New Zealand accent as Jane Eyre.
Okay, was this before or after she won the Oscar for the piano?
It was after.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is going to be, I feel like this is so weird to say. She's really good in this and also not good at all. Like, she's totally miscast in this. Because as you say, like, she's got a New Zealand accent.
She's not trying to do a different accent.
Like, she really isn't.
No.
She's still really good.
She's good. It's just weird that, like, someone won an Oscar 3 years earlier, and I understand she's a child, so things, like, change, but, like, this is a very small part. This is not, like, Oscar winner Anna Paquin carrying a film. Like, she's in about 15 minutes of this movie playing, like, the young version of the main character.
I would say it's kind of a prestige picture, though.
Yeah, I guess that's fair.
Like, Zeffirelli was big.
Yeah, no, I guess that's fair.
Yeah.
Like, she got to work with Zeffirelli. Like, that was probably a draw.
I think there is, and I can't remember exactly how it shakes out in every single version, but I think this was one where the actress who plays Helen Burns is better than the actress who plays young Jane.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
She's gone on to do a bunch of stuff.
Totally.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we get Little Rogue as young Jane.
Baby Rogue.
Yeah. And then she grows up, oddly, to turn into Charlotte Gainsbourg.
They don't resemble each other much.
Like, even a little.
Really not at all.
I mean, it's one of those things where, like, we know what Anna Paquin looks like now.
Yeah.
And it looks nothing like her.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, like, probably more Janey than Charlotte Gainsbourg, who is about 5'9". And I mean, clearly what they chose was, instead of tiny Jane, the way that they wanted to express her, quote, plainness was they made her kind of gawky.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's kind of tall and awkward, and that is the physicality they chose for Jane for this movie. It seems to me to be a choice, not just like, oh, we miscast someone who's supposed to be short as someone who's very, very tall.
Yes. No, other than being tall, I actually think her casting as Jane is really,
no,
really
it's great.
good.
I think she's wonderful, actually.
Yeah. Then we get as Rochester, William Hurt.
Famously American.
Also tall.
Much like George C. Scott.
Famous forehead, William Hurt.
Yes.
I want to hold off for a second about how we felt about his performance.
Okay.
Because it will come up. I don't have a ton to say about kind of the earlier parts of the movie. We see her childhood.
Mm-hmm.
We see her time at with Mrs. Reed.
Yeah.
And the kids, like, the movie starts right in the middle of her being chased through the hallways by these 3 horrible children. And she, like, is yelling, and they throw her directly into the red room.
Yeah.
And
Fiona Shaw is her aunt. This is a star-studded cast.
yeah, totally. Like, they start with that, and then Brocklehurst shows up.
Yeah.
He's by far my favorite Brocklehurst.
Oh, yeah.
Of all of them.
Because he's terrifying.
He's terrifying, but not in a loud way.
No.
He's terrifying in a very quiet way.
Yeah.
This man looks like if at any point he loses 5% of his concentration, he will fall to literal pieces. He looks like the only thing that's keeping him together is his poise.
He has a literal stick up his butt. Like, that's the posture he's going for.
Like, if you were to open up his hand, palm up, and place a Jenga tower in it, it would remain in place as he walked across a room. He has so much poise. Yeah. And that makes him scary. Yeah. It really makes him scary.
He's very tall, and he's shot in a way that makes him look... Because he's talking to a child.
Yeah.
He's shot up.
Right.
So, like, it's from her perspective. Mm-hmm. Like, we're seeing this, like, column of a man.
Yeah. But other Brocklehursts that we watch feel like they need to be loud in order to be scary.
Yeah.
And he never is that Brocklehurst. No. He's my favorite Brocklehurst.
Yeah.
By far. Then she goes to Lowood, and she meets, little Helen Burns.
Yeah.
And I remember... So this is actually, full disclosure... This is, of everything we watched and read, this was the only thing I had seen previous to doing this episode.
Right, because we had watched it.
We watched it a few years ago together. I came out of it really, really enjoying it. And there's one thing about it that I want to say specifically, and specifically about her time in Lowood.
Okay.
This is, and I'll argue this for years, this is, of every version we watched, by far the most beautiful version. Mm-hmm. So the cinematography is by a guy named David Watkin, who I remember reading his Wikipedia page, like, at the time and finding out more about him, like, famously lazy cinematographer. Everything he did was so that he could do as little work as possible.
Great.
Which is great.
I mean, that seems fine.
Totally, totally fine. The movie looks like a Vermeer.
Yeah.
Especially in Lowood.
I was going to say the light is beautiful.
Tons of natural lighting. It's a stunning movie. Like, I had an emotional reaction to how beautiful this movie is. Just from a cinematography standpoint, I think it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
So she goes to Lowood. She meets little Helen Burns. I remember when we first watched it, I didn't know the story, but Helen Burns coughs.
And you're like, oh,
and
no.
I just said to you, is Helen Burns about to die? And you said, yes, she absolutely is. So Helen Burns dies. And then we get the shot of her growing up.
Yeah.
She is suddenly Charlotte Gainsbourg and is tall and skinny and still plain.
Yes. In the context of the movie.
In the context of the movie, she is plain. And she leaves Lowood. Yeah. In this version, she is leaving and she is in the carriage to Thornfield. And I know there was something you wanted to talk about with this that I want you to talk about.
Well, it sort of became almost like a meme. I think this was maybe the first version that did it, or at least that we noticed, which is that like the way that they express plot and show time passing while also advancing her physical presence from one place to another is they show her sitting in the carriage, reading the letter from Mrs. Fairfax, hearing the voiceover. So she's reading the letter in the carriage. And I think we saw that same shot like at least 3 more times. Mm-hmm. And so it sort of became a joke like, oh, is she going to read the letter in the carriage? Yep, she's reading the letter in the carriage. But I did want to say one other thing about Lowood before we move on from there. Yeah. This is one of the few versions that had a really sympathetic teacher that had a really good Miss Temple. So Miss Temple in the book and in the 1973 version is the only other one that had a Miss Temple that I really liked, is actually the headmistress of the school. She's in charge. So she is the one that kind of goes head to head with Mr. Brocklehurst about like having adequate provisions and stuff for the girls. In this one, they actually made a choice to make her just like a regular teacher, just a very kind teacher. And I kind of liked that because it's sort of like the why didn't Gandalf just send the eagles to Mount Doom thing. It's like, if she is in charge, why doesn't she make it better? And the answer, of course, is complicated, but they didn't have a lot of time to tell that story. So they just made her kind of trod upon like the rest of the teachers. She doesn't really have any power to improve things, but all she can do is essentially talk kindly to the girls, which she does. And they show in a very few shots that she and Jane have this really strong bond and close relationship, because she kind of walks out with Jane and tells her that she's glad she's leaving and she's so happy that she's going to make a life for herself. And
she's expressing confusion about why she looks the way she does when she looked like Anna Paquin when she was a little girl.
You've changed so much since you've come here. And in the book, Miss Temple actually leaves Lowood because she gets married. And in this case, she explicitly says, no, I'm going to stay here till I die, essentially. Like there's no one else to be kind to these girls. But I just really liked Miss Temple in this. I liked that Jane had a relationship with someone other than poor dead Helen. And Miss Temple's played by an actress named Amanda Root. You would recognize her face. She's been in a lot of British TV and stuff like that.
Totally.
Yeah.
So then she leaves and she gets to Thornfield and she meets Mrs. Fairfax.
Yes.
Who's played in this version by Joan Plowright. Yes. I didn't have, like, I know Joan Plowright, but I didn't have this, like, great reaction to her that you did.
Yeah.
What do you tell us about Joan Plowright?
Well, Joan Plowright is English theater royalty, both by marriage and in her own right. I don't know if you know this. Joan Plowright was Laurence Olivier's third wife. So,
yep.
But he was like old and she was young. So like she's still up and running and he died 50 years ago or whatever. But like that is the caliber of person that's in this film. And Joan Plowright is the person that when we did the first episode that I was saying, like, they have made a choice that Mrs. Fairfax knows what's up. Mm-hmm. She knows everything. And the struggle that you clearly see in her face, because she's very good at acting, is that she desperately wants to be kind to Jane and is kind. Mm-hmm. But she also knows that there's this terrible secret in the house and she knows exactly what's going on with Mr. Rochester.
Yeah. And I think this brings up something that now finally I can talk about. And I couldn't really talk about it in the first episode because we hadn't gotten to this version mm-hmm. yet. One thing that I think Zeffirelli has a really good understanding of, and this absolutely was true of Romeo and Juliet, he really knows how to show that a character has an inner life and that they're not just saying lines.
Yeah.
We have such a clear idea of what his characters want, mm-hmm. what they need, how they feel towards the other characters. And you mentioned that, like, it is very clear of the two things that you were just saying. Whereas in other ones, we're like, I guess she likes Jane. Maybe not. It's unclear.
Yeah.
Did she know? Like, it's unclear.
Yeah.
With this one,
It's clear.
it is very, very clear, but it's not clear through dialogue. It's clear through acting.
Yeah.
And it's clear through acting and direction.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah.
She has one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie is when Jane first arrives and she's bringing her to her room. It's like the first real bed that Jane's ever...
Yeah, certainly the first room she's ever had to herself.
Yeah. And Mrs. Fairfax's whole thing is like, if this isn't okay, just let me know.
Yeah.
And Jane, does she say like...
Is this for me?
Is this real?
No, she says, I think I must have walked into... I think I must be dreaming. Or
Oh,
something
yeah,
like
yeah,
that. And
yeah.
she says, we're real. And we're so happy to have you.
But it's so much kinder
It's so
than that.
sweet, yeah.
Like, it's not a... When she says we're real, she's not saying it in a way that kind of implies, I don't even understand why you would say that.
No,
I'm
no.
real. It's more like, I get what you're going through right now. You sweet girl. We're real.
Yeah.
This is a real thing that's happening right now. You can feel comfortable here.
Yeah.
It's very emotionally intelligent.
Yes.
Which
yes.
I really appreciated. So Joan Plower is my favorite Mrs. Fairfax.
Oh, by far.
Of
by
all
far.
of them.
Well, she has the most characterization.
Totally.
By far. And I wanted to mention another character that I
Yes.
think has a lot of character. I don't know if you know who I'm going to say. I want to talk about Adele. We literally have not mentioned Adele.
No.
In an episode and a half. We have not mentioned Adele. So Adele is the little girl that Jane has gone to governess.
Mm-hmm.
She is about 8 years old or 10. And the reason I feel like we haven't really mentioned her, certainly not any of the little actresses playing her, is she's sort of been nothing so far.
She was Margaret O'Brien in the 1943 version.
Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah, we didn't mention Margaret O'Brien. Margaret O'Brien is great.
Yeah.
She's very adorable.
She's like clearly like doing a French accent.
Yeah. Well, I think my note was like, all these kids are great. And I think I was including Margaret O'Brien as
Yeah.
like one of the movie's children.
Right.
But I think the thing that we really haven't talked about at all is that Adele really only speaks French.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of this tradition as we get into these newer movies is that they've definitely, most of them I think have cast French-speaking actresses whose second language is English. So when they speak, they naturally have French accents.
Which is smart.
Which is smart.
Yeah.
Because that is hard to play as a child. But I think it may be because they had to look for this very specific quality that maybe they could have found people that were better at acting.
Yeah.
Because Adele is not always great.
Mm-hmm.
But she's very good in this. I think she's one of the best Adeles that we see. They definitely went out of their way to find someone that like was just this like tiny blonde doll of a child, which is how people are constantly like referring to her. She's like the daughter of this very glamorous opera dancer.
Yeah.
And she was taught from a very early age to like sing and dance and like be attractive. And Jane is like, I want to teach you about some more solid values, and that's fine. But the other thing is, like, one of the reasons that they hired Jane to be her governess is that Jane speaks French.
Mm-hmm.
And Charlotte Gainsbourg is, of course, French.
Yes.
And speaks French fluently. So it was nice to hear someone speaking French fluently when the plot required them to be fluent in French. Because some of the French has not been amazing.
This is true. One other thing I want to say really quickly is they are really smart about putting Adele into scenes that in the book she wasn't in.
Right.
So like they'll have conversations happening between Jane and Rochester that would have been in like Rochester's sitting room.
Yeah.
Now it's happening out in the garden while Jane is painting with Adele and Rochester's walking through.
Right.
So they're showing more of Jane's workday
Yeah.
and Rochester's presence in her workday.
Yeah.
But they also do a really smart thing in establishing how Jane feels about Adele, because there's the scene in the book. This is after the fire.
Yeah.
So she finds the fire. Rochester puts it out, obviously, because he's a big strapping man.
Yeah, whatever.
Then later, we haven't even talked about the party.
Yeah.
And so they've had this party, and then that night there is this horrible scream. Now, it's also important to say that a stranger has showed up during this party, a Mr. Mason from somewhere, maybe Jamaica.
From Jamaica.
Yeah. That night, there is a horrible scream.
The night is rent by screams.
And everybody wakes up and everybody comes out. And basically, Rochester says, everything's fine. One of the servants had a bad dream. Everybody go to bed. And then as soon as they go to bed, he says to Jane, hey, Jane, you need to come with me because something's very bad. In this version, this is the only one where when the scream happens, she runs out of her room and immediately runs to Adele's room to check on her.
It's very subtle, but it's so sweet. Like, because he finds her there.
Yes.
Making sure Adele's okay.
But we also see him go to her room first.
Yeah.
And because their rooms are next to each other.
Right.
So he goes to her room first to find her, not finding her there. She comes out of Adele's room finding that she's okay. And that's where the scene picks up from in that way in the book.
That's right.
That is so smart.
Yeah.
I think that's just a perfect example of how intelligent this movie is as an adaptation. It takes every chance it can to give these characters agency over their stories.
Yeah.
I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. So we're sort of getting into the horror aspect, because what has happened, of course, is that Mason is Rochester's wife's brother, and he has gone to see if she's okay, despite being told not to, and she has stabbed him in the heart.
She bit him.
She bit him and stabbed him.
Yeah.
And he is upstairs bleeding to death, and they have to like take care of him and go get the doctor, and he lives. He's fine. But the thing I wanted to mention, there's another thing, because you were talking earlier about the sort of horror aspects of this. And this movie does an incredibly subtle thing that I don't think any other version did. So I just want to mention again, Jane is told that there's a woman that sits upstairs and sews all day whose name is Grace Poole. She's played in this version by a woman named Billie Whitelaw, who you gave me a very interesting piece of information about. Would you like to repeat that?
She was Samuel Beckett's muse.
For some reason.
That's great. And also, she's our second Hot Fuzz alum to show up.
Great.
After Timothy Dalton. Billie Whitelaw's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
She is so good in this. And she is, if we're talking, well, I don't want to step on your toes.
No, please don't. So again, star-studded cast is what I'm saying, because this is not a large part.
No.
So she's this very like dour, stern-faced, kind of creepy lady.
If you look up the word severe in the dictionary, you will find a picture of Billie Whitelaw as Grace Poole.
And she is being told, that weird laugh you heard, it must have been Grace Poole. There is a shot where she has met Grace Poole and Mrs. Fairfax, and Grace Poole is walking away, and Jane hears a laugh from another direction, somewhere else in the house, very clearly not coming from Grace Poole.
Yeah.
It makes Jane not stupid, because we know that she knows that it's not Grace Poole. And I think almost every other version, and indeed in the book, she just kind of keeps saying, yeah, Grace Poole laughs like that. Clearly she doesn't. Like, it's so obvious she doesn't.
But that's the thing. I disagree with you there.
Okay.
Because one of the things the book does that's so great is Detective Jane.
Yeah.
And when Jane's being a detective, it's great. And it does speak to her intelligence.
Yeah.
Because she trusts the people around her, and she knows that Grace Poole is the one who set the fire. She knows this because Rochester told her that. And she's also been led to believe that Grace Poole's crazy. The fact that she's 18 and believes these grown-ups around her, I don't think that makes her stupid.
No, I'm not saying it makes her stupid. I'm saying that the way that some of these movies portray her, makes her seem stupid.
Okay, I misunderstood.
Because she's believing something that is clearly so obviously not true.
I misunderstood.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you.
Great.
I apologize.
That's fine.
But anyway, Billie Whitelaw's Grace Poole. She's my favorite Grace Poole.
Yeah.
She's terrifying in this.
Yeah. So let's move on to the house party, because there's another character that we have really not talked about very much. Rochester, we learn, has been spending, for some reason, much more time at home since Jane has arrived. Usually he'll be gone for a year and they won't hear from him. He travels on the continent or whatever. And not only is he spending more time at home, but he's gone across the fields to the Ingram's house, and there's a house party there, and he sends word he's bringing everybody back. And of course, like in this time and place, when people went visiting, it wasn't just for a day. Like they would come for weeks or months and stay at like people's houses because they didn't have anything to do.
They play that wonderful 19th century party game. Let's sit in a circle and look at each other.
Yeah, well, they play charades at one point.
Yeah.
And he brings all these people, and Jane is told that she is every night after dinner to come sit with them in the drawing room and bring Adele, and that is Rochester's wish. So she gets kind of up close and personal with a lot of these characters, but one is the beautiful Blanche Ingram.
Now I want to go back for a second. We talk about how making Jane look plain it's a result of good casting.
Yes.
And up until now, every time we've talked about that, we have only talked about the casting of Jane.
Yeah.
They do something really smart in this because they don't just cast Jane to look plain, they also cast Blanche to make Jane look plain.
That's correct. Everyone has been talking up Blanche. She's so beautiful. She's so beautiful. Obviously, she's going to marry Mr. Rochester at some point, perhaps. And so in this version, Blanche Ingram is played by Elle Macpherson, a literal supermodel.
Literally one of the supermodels. Yeah. Like, I feel like people forget that supermodel only describes like
5 people.
5 people.
Yeah.
Like, you're not a supermodel if you're a model. Elle Macpherson is a supermodel.
Yeah.
And how's her acting in this?
It's okay.
She's good. No, she's good.
It's not a part that requires like really deep acting chops.
But that's smart on the filmmaker's part.
Yeah.
Like, they don't give her a ton to do.
It's fine.
But what they give her, they know she can do, and she does really well.
She's fine.
But when you compare her to Charlotte Gainsbourg, who they've also planed up a bit.
Yeah, they've given her kind of harsh makeup, so you like her face is in lots of shadows and things like that.
Charlotte Gainsbourg looks like the most average woman I've ever seen in my entire life, partly because of casting and partly because of makeup, but also partly because they put her next to Elle Macpherson.
Yeah. Well, they do this thing that I really like, you know, if you're talking about what you have to do to compress this book into a movie-length movie, they do something that I love, which is Jane making comparison between herself and Blanche. In the book, and in some of these versions, what she does, and I mentioned this I think in episode 1, is she like paints the most beautiful, she's a wonderful artist. We know this about Jane. She paints a beautiful portrait of Blanche, and this is before that she's even met. So she's only going off of Mrs. Fairfax's description,
right?
But she paints on marble, and she did like beautiful watercolors, and like just the most beautiful portrait. And then she like sketches herself in like harsh charcoals, and she like puts them up next to each other, and she says, I'm gonna look at this every day just to remind myself how unworthy I am. Like, it's kind of emo of her.
Well, I mean, growing up in Lowood, like a lot of that stuff comes from her upbringing.
And at this point, you already know like she's falling in love with Mr. Rochester,
right?
But knows like, oh well, I don't stand a chance. But in this version, she sees Blanche for the first time. She sees how Mr. Rochester like interacts with her, and Mrs. Fairfax says something to her like, oh yes, of course, like they're gonna marry. And there's just this shot of her like walking down the hallway. She turns and looks in the mirror, and so you're just seeing her face in the mirror, lit in just a really like still beautiful but unflattering, right? In this way, and she just whispers to herself, "You're a fool." And that's the end of the scene. That's all you need. You know instantly she's comparing herself to Blanche. She's taken what Mrs. Fairfax just said to heart, and you know she's in love with Mr. Rochester.
Yeah.
That's all you need. 3 words, you're a fool.
And also, one thing I want to say is, we talked about in the first episode that relationship between Jane and the reader. You say she looks into a mirror. She looks directly at the camera through a mirror.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, she's looking at the audience.
Yeah.
Saying this. We're getting like a direct window into her soul.
Yeah.
Essentially at that point.
Yeah.
Which I think is such a good choice.
Yeah.
This movie's full of good choices. There's 2 examples I have of how strong the writing is in this in terms of adaptation.
Okay.
And where they decide to take things and move them. So, one of the there are 2 conversations that she has with Rochester in the book. And again, in the book, they're basically just in his sitting room. He's sitting next to the fire, and they're having one of a series of conversations. In it, when she first gets to Thornfield, and she meets Adele, and let me rephrase that. Let me go back. When Rochester first gets to Thornfield,
okay,
he is sitting in the room. Adele is there. She is there, and he's trying to figure her out.
Yeah,
he's trying to get the lay of the land. And he asks her about her musical ability. Can you play? And they have a great scene that I don't need to describe in detail here.
Yeah.
But they have a very good scene. She goes and she plays. And what we find out is that she's not very good. Well, she's okay.
It's the famous line, do you play? I play a little. Oh, that's what every schoolgirl says. And then she goes and plays, and he says, you're right, you play a little.
Right, exactly. In this, they make a really smart choice where they move that to a conversation later where he's looking at her art.
Yeah.
Because they're directly contrasting her musical ability with her artistic ability.
Well, because in this one, she doesn't even play.
Right,
like
yeah.
in most of the other ones, like 2 things happen. He says, do you play? She plays. He's like, it's not very good. And then he looks at her art, which is very good.
Right. Later.
In this one, he says, do you play? She says a little. He's like, that's what everybody says. And that's the end, because it actually doesn't matter if she plays or not.
Right.
The important thing we need to know about Jane is she's a very good artist.
Mm-hmm.
So they choose to spend their time on him looking at her paintings and talking to her about what inspired her to paint those paintings, because that is the thing that is important to know about Jane. You don't need to spend 5 minutes on her playing not great and then him confirming that she plays not great. It is so unimportant to the character.
Right.
And in a book, it's fine because it's just a fun little detail. But in a movie, you don't need to spend your time on it.
Yes.
Yes.
So the second one is he asks her a question. He asks her if she finds him handsome. And her reaction is...
No, sir.
And that starts a whole conversation between the two of them where he's like taken aback by that. It's great. And that happens in front of the fireplace in the book. In this version, this is what I was talking about where they're out in the garden.
Yeah.
She's out with Adele and they're drawing pictures. And the scene is set up to do a number of different things. They are set up above kind of the lawn, looking down, and she is sketching. He's walking along the lawn with one of the caretakers, and she begins to sketch him. So immediately, you're seeing her artistic ability. You're also starting to see that she's developing some kind of feelings for this guy.
Right.
She's observing him very, very closely. And the picture she draws of him is a flattering picture and very accurate. He comes up, looks at it, and then he sees that she's drawing him and immediately says, "Do you find me handsome?"
And she says no.
And she says no. So they move that whole conversation to a scene where it's suddenly doing so much more.
Yeah, where him asking her out of nowhere, "Do you find me handsome?" is not creepy if there's an impetus for it, which is something that she's done, which is like, if I was drawing a picture of you, that wouldn't be a crazy thing to be like, "Oh, you're drawing a picture of me. That must mean you think I'm handsome."
Yeah.
Like, it's not weird. It makes it less creepy.
And that's actually, I think, one of the things this movie ironically suffers for. He's probably one of the least creepy Rochesters of any version that we watch.
Yeah.
And I think that's a thing people don't like about it. Like William Hurt, and I'm putting this in quote, like not quotes, but like famously miscast in this role. That's how he's regarded.
Yeah.
We disagree.
I liked him in
strongly. Like I think I'll say this now, he's my favorite Rochester of any of them, not because his British accent is amazing.
It's not.
But he's actually playing the character closest to the Rochester in the book.
Yeah.
He's playing a Rochester that I can actually see Jane falling in love with without removing the really kind of unsettling aspects of his character.
Yeah, and the thing I was about to say is their age difference is the farthest apart we've seen so far. She's 25 and he's 46.
Right.
So, like, you do get that aspect of, like, these are people that are far apart in age.
Yeah.
But, like, what might draw them together? No, like, full disclosure, this is one of my favorite movies. Like, not my favorite versions of Jane Eyre. This is probably in my top 10, top 15, maybe, like, favorite movies. I really like this movie.
Mm-hmm.
So I was actually pretty shocked when you said that you'd seen like bad reviews of it, which I don't even really want to get into or talk about. Like, this is about our opinion.
Well, I only wanted to talk about it in terms of William Hurt.
Yeah. For sure.
Because other criticisms I've seen of it are that it's too short and it takes too much out. But like, it's a movie. That's how that works. I don't think that's worth spending more time on than the 10 seconds we're spending right now.
Cool.
So those are two choices they make in the writing of it that I love and I think are evidence of this movie being very, very good and written very, very well as an adaptation. There is a scene where I think it's when he's asked her to marry him and she's saying like, "No, I won't do it, blah, blah, blah." And in the line is, "Don't struggle so."
Yeah.
Okay. In every other version, the reason he says the line, "Don't struggle so," is because he is physically holding her and she is physically struggling.
Yeah.
And he says, "Don't struggle so."
Yeah.
Which I think is an easy interpretation to take.
Sure.
In this one, when he says "don't struggle so," it's because she's playing up the emotional struggle that the character is going through, and he's responding to that.
Yeah.
He's not physically restraining her, which, again, like, I know that that's a small detail, but this movie is full of stuff like that.
Yeah.
That make them they're my favorite Jane and Rochester.
Yeah.
Of any of the ones. Even though Zella Clark is my favorite Jane, the two of them are absolutely my favorite, and I think for me get the closest to what the relationship is from the book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as you said, like, this movie is nothing if not emotionally intelligent.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know that I can't imagine Zeffirelli, and maybe I'm wrong because I'm not like, I don't know every single one of his movies, but like, he doesn't strike me as the kind of director that would be satisfied with filming a love story where you couldn't see why the two characters would ever be attracted to each other.
Totally.
Like,
and that was true about Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Because we saw some Romeo and Juliets that we did not feel that way. And there was no chemistry between them.
Totally.
Yeah.
So on the whole, I think this is an incredibly strong adaptation. It does, like, the whole Rivers's
It's like
part,
almost gone. But that's okay.
It's okay. Like, it's there, but it's barely there. And there really isn't the stuff with, like, St. John proposing to her.
No.
Like, it has the scene. She does go to see Mrs. Reed. It barely has the Riverses, but, like...
So, okay. So this is the last thing I want to say about this version. So something that you pointed out to me, and I've seen lots of Jane Eyres, and I've read the book a million times, and this was something that you brought to for me, which I think is true and accurate, is that the thing that Jane values most is at the end of the book, she has a family.
Yes.
She's never had a family. And when it's revealed to her that the Rivers are her cousins, so she gets two pieces of information at the same time. You have 20,000 pounds, which is a lot of money, and we three Riverses are your cousins. And she barely even registers the money. But when he says, we're your cousins, she's like overjoyed. She's never been so happy in her life.
Yeah.
And St. John says to her, you are weird. Like, what? Who cares? Where you're like cousins once removed or whatever. And she's like, you grew up with sisters, so maybe you don't care about a cousin, but I had no one. And now I have 3 relatives. I feel so rich.
Right. And just to backtrack for a second, I don't think anyone plays that moment better than Zella Clark.
Yeah, she does it great.
So much joy in her performance.
Yeah. To be fair, they give that scene a lot more length.
Yes.
Because they have 11 episodes to stretch it out. So the thing that you really lose when you take out a lot of the Rivers stuff is really the thing that's most important to Jane, which is that she finds a family. However, this version did something incredibly emotionally intelligent, which is they realized they didn't have enough time to set all of that up in the way that it really needed to be set up. Because you really have to establish their relationship in order to make her that happy that they're cousins. Because they're not cousins in this one.
No.
But what does happen is when St. John is explaining to her that her uncle's died and he's left her this money, blah, blah, blah. One of the things that has come into his possession is like a packet of letters that the uncle had saved. I might cry. And one is the letter that Jane's father wrote to him announcing her birth. And Jane is reading it and just starts crying. And Rivers just kind of like lays his hand on her shoulder and says, you were deeply loved, Miss Eyre. And she just can't compose herself. She's just lost it. And Jeremy's crying.
Shut up.
Like, again, just talking about emotional intelligence, that's not in the book. Someone made that up. But it was someone who read this book and came to the same conclusion that you did, which is she has to find her family before she can be whole. And once she's whole, then she can go back to Mr. Rochester and say, I'm an independent person now, and I don't need you to complete me because I have this family that I know exists and is part of me. So whoever wrote that into the screenplay, I don't know if it was Zeffirelli or the other screenwriter, understood this story so deeply. And it's not in any other version that she has this letter from her father, but it's amazing. It's really, really good.
It's so good.
Yeah. Like, talk about, in terms of adaptation, the spirit rather than the letter of the book. Like, that's one of the most intelligent things that I think I've ever seen of anything we've watched. Like, something that wasn't in the book get added. That's one of the most intelligent things I think I've seen. Just that little, but it's subtle. It's extremely subtle, but I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
unless they like totally didn't do it on purpose and I'm reading like a ton into it that's not there, but I don't think I am.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
It doesn't, I don't see how that could have happened by accident.
Yeah.
Because they did add it.
Yeah.
But anyway, it ends, and it is, I think, just a tremendous movie. Yeah. I think it's such a good adaptation.
We've spent a lot of time on it, but I think it's because we really, really liked it a lot.
Yeah. Then a year later,
oh God,
they made a TV movie.
This is
directed by Robert Young. Hang on. This is directed by Robert Young. It's written by Richard Hawley, Kay Mellor, and Peter Wright. Starred Samantha Morton as Jane and Kieran Hines as Rochester. Okay.
I don't know that we have used the word plagiarism a lot on this show because I think we tend to view adaptation as fair game. But this movie came out a year after the movie we just talked about.
And as a TV movie was likely in production after that one had come out.
And several scenes are shot for shot, including the entire opening sequence of the Zeffirelli film.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we put in the joke about reading the letter in the carriage, because that scene is exactly the same.
Yeah.
But the entire opening sequence is the same. That's the thing that was that blew my mind.
It's not exactly the same.
Okay.
So yeah, it's like the cousin's chasing her through the house and then she gets thrown in the red room. This one does have the dead uncle in the bed that she envisions.
Yeah.
That's not in 96.
Maybe that's why I wrote fascinating lack of subtlety in my notes, and I have no idea what I was referring to.
I think it was the ghost.
You think it was the ghost?
Yeah. Okay. This is a dramatically unsuccessful movie.
Yeah. That's a nice way of putting it.
I just want to get that out there. And I know we said before that we're not going to talk about other people's opinions of stuff, but one thing I just want to say that blew my fucking mind. This movie has a higher IMDb user rating than the Zeffirelli version.
I don't understand that.
I don't get it. This
is it just fewer people, so it got skewed, Yelp reviews?
It's 1,000 ratings versus 3,000 ratings.
Okay.
So yeah, fewer, but
not that many.
No, this is okay.
People are dumb.
All right.
Anyone who thinks this movie is good is not right.
I just remember as we were watching it, I can't remember if you said it or I said it, but I have in quotes in my notes, let's see if she's reading the letter in the carriage.
Yeah.
And then I just wrote, boom.
Boom goes the dynamite.
Okay, she gets to Thornfield.
Oh, I love this.
And she's walking through. And she's just asking all these questions well, how many rooms are there? Well, how many floors are there? And this is all in order to get Mrs. Fairfax to say, well, there's a third floor, but no one goes up there.
Yeah.
No one talks like this. No one says these things.
It's very strange. And Mrs. Fairfax throughout is this is the coldest, meanest Mrs. Fairfax.
My note is Mrs. Fairfax is kind of a jerk in this.
She's so mean. And then the voiceover is, I was relieved to find Mrs. Fairfax so friendly. There are so many times in this particular version that we are told something that is clearly not true. The right hand does not know what the left hand is doing. Whoever was recording the voiceover had clearly not seen the dailies from the movie.
Right.
Because they would have changed that line because she's so mean to her.
Ugh.
Oh my God.
Now, there is one other character that is meaner to her than Mrs. Fairfax.
And that is your friend and mine, Mr. Edward Fairfax Rochester.
I want to be clear. We'll talk more about Samantha Morton, I think, in a little bit. Kieran Hines, though.
Yes.
He is an actor I like.
Yes.
I'm putting all of those in caps. That is the headline. There's a group of actors that I like. It's a very long list. He is an actor that I like. I don't know whose fault this is. I don't think it's his fault. I want to say it's the director's fault. It feels most like the director's fault.
Yeah.
He is the single most off-putting
so
Rochester
creepy.
that I have seen in any of these versions. He's maybe in any movie I have ever seen where one character falls in love with another character, and the person they fall in love with is this much of a serial killer.
Yeah. If it turned out that he was a serial killer, that would be appropriate for the way that he's playing this character.
Now, I want to acknowledge something really quickly that we have not mentioned in the first episode or so far in this one. We haven't mentioned the Wide Sargasso Sea.
Okay.
Which, if anyone was listening to this and going well, why haven't they mentioned that yet? It's just because we didn't read it and we didn't watch any of the versions. I certainly would like to do it as a follow-up.
Yeah, we could totally do that.
But for people, I'd heard the name before, but I didn't understand that it was a prequel to Jane Eyre. So for those that don't know, it's a prequel that was written years later, and it was basically written as a response to the idea that Jane Eyre is really kind of trucking in aspects of colonialism,
which is true. We just haven't really gotten into it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It would it's trucking in true shit.
Yeah.
So Bertha, his wife, there's some really problematic stuff going on with his treatment of Bertha and their story. So Wide Sargasso Sea is all about how a young Mr. Rochester first met Bertha and fell in love, and they got married, and then she started going crazy. And the whole idea is that the fire she starts is she's been a captive, and this is a way for her to kind of regain her agency and gain freedom over this awful, awful man.
Yeah.
Which, I don't think that's a bad interpretation. No. It's an interpretation.
Yeah. We should save it and do it for a different episode.
I really do, because it's a book and it's 2 movies.
Yeah,
so
that's
I
great.
really, really want to do it.
Let's do it.
But that's Wide Sargasso Sea. This is the only one where I'm thinking, no, he's a villain, and Wide Sargasso Sea makes sense based on the way they're playing it. He's terrifying. He's so intimidating. Like he.
Well, like he's a serial. Like at one point, there's this famous scene. They're like just met. They're sitting by the fire. He's asking her all these questions, and like. I'm paraphrasing, but like he reaches forward and he like takes her hand and he like starts talking to her about how young she is. And then he like hyper focuses on like your small, young hand, so supple, your skin so soft. And you like turned to me and you were like, he's going to make her into a skin suit. Like, that's what's about to happen.
I want to wear your fingers is what he is saying at that moment. But he's so mean to her and it's so pointed. Like, he is unbelievably kind to Adele.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's a scene where in no other version, and certainly not the book, is he ever like directly kind to Adele.
Yeah.
In this one, he is very loving towards Adele, and then immediately in the same scene is horrible to Jane.
Yeah, and I think they put this in like, oh, how can this guy's clearly terrible. How can we make her see his humanity? Oh, have him be nice to Adele. And like have Adele really love him so clearly like she sees the good in him.
I guess so.
Like, I mean, that's clearly what they were doing.
Yeah.
I don't know what else that is because it's not in the book for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like he is like, oh my gosh, come here. Like she cuddles up next to him. Like, and then it is weird because he's so creepy that it's like, oh God, Adele, get away from this man. Like, what is he going to do to you?
Totally. He's going to turn her into a hat.
But like the scene where Jane is saying to him, so we've had the unsuccessful marriage. It's the next morning. She's saying, I have to get away. Or maybe it's that night. And I'm leaving. Like he doesn't actually throw her down the stairs, but it seems like he's about to. He is screaming at her, screaming
after
like
he's been found out for doing something bad.
Yeah,
she's done nothing
and
wrong,
not in a way of like this cry is coming from my soul because I'm so unhappy. Like in a way of like, you have made me angry and I'm going to hurt you.
Yeah,
but the funny thing is, what he's saying is, stay with me, and I'm looking at you going like, well, she's not going to do that now. Like. You're screaming at like he is violent.
Yeah.
He is terrifying. And there is absolutely nothing whatsoever in any way redeemable about this character. We don't know why she goes back to him.
I actually wrote, so there's a line where she says in voiceover, he made me love him without even realizing it. And I just wrote, or even trying, or even deserving it. She loves him.
Yeah.
Samantha Morton's actually playing that really well. The problem is the filmmaking doesn't support it. It's really, really bad.
Yeah, again, there's so much where we're told something that the filmmaking does not support.
Yeah, there's just so many little examples of things where they just clearly weren't thinking, like things just don't make sense in a way that just rips me out of the story like every 5 minutes. So when Mason shows up at the house, the whole idea is like Mason shows up and then Mrs. Fairfax comes into the room where the party is happening and announces that he's there. In this version, she brings him directly into the room
like,
where
hi.
this party is happening, which wouldn't have happened.
No, that's
like,
not how this works.
Who is this guy? It doesn't make any sense. So other little things like Bessie, who we talked about before, Bessie, who is from Mrs. Reed's house.
Yeah, the servant.
Who is the servant who like is alternately ambivalent towards Jane or very nice to Jane. In this one, she's just as cruel to Jane as Mrs. Reed is. Yeah. And the kids are. Jane is so happy to see Bessie when she finally sees Bessie.
Yeah.
She's so happy to see her, and it makes no fucking sense at all.
Because she was never nice to her.
Yeah.
The only reason you would know she was nice is if you had read the book.
Totally.
Yeah.
Mrs. Reed is completely eliminated.
Yeah.
She's just not in it, really, after that. And then later, we get, I think, the most fucked up part of this whole movie.
Okay.
There's the scene where she comes back, and he says, basically they have their whole scene where he says like, no, I don't want to marry Blanche. I want to marry you. And she eventually says yes. And they kiss. Bro, do you even know how to kiss? The only thing in my notes is just all caps. This is the worst kiss I have ever seen. It's like he's kissing the air next to her cheek.
Yeah, but like passionately.
Passionately. I can't describe. Can you describe it?
No, it's like there's literal dead air because I can't describe it.
Yeah.
I can't describe it. It's
I think you have to watch it.
It's bizarre.
It is the worst kiss I've ever seen, though. Have
Yes.
you ever seen a worse kiss on TV or film?
No, they're just like both sort of moving their lips in the air. They're not actually connecting with each other, but she also looks like she's having an orgasm.
Like, they're kissing in... The best thing I can describe it as is the way a tugboat will like hit a big ship to push it in a certain direction. Like, that's how they're kissing. Like, it's like two things hitting into each other that are meant to hit into each other, but like not in a sexy or attractive or emotional way.
I think what you're describing is just like the most utter lack of chemistry between any two human beings.
Like, I already said how I think William Hurt and Charlotte Gainsbourg have like the most chemistry so far.
Yeah.
They absolutely have the worst chemistry so far.
Yeah, it is it's a shame.
Yeah.
Their ages are correct. She's only 20 and he's 44.
Just really quickly, what did you think of Samantha Morton in this?
She's fine.
She's fine, right? Like, Samantha Morton's
She's
a really
given
good actor.
so little to do.
Yeah.
Like, this Jane is like unusually passive.
Like, and I think one of the things that makes it so confusing is how well she's playing Jane's feelings towards Rochester.
Yeah.
Like, she's actually doing
he
that
just
well.
doesn't deserve it.
Which makes no sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's terrible. But then, so now they're going to get married.
Yeah. Well, okay. So again, just to talk about how this movie literally plagiarized the 1996 Charlotte Gainsbourg movie. So she's watching, this is what happens in both movies and in the book. This is what happens. She's watching out the window for Rochester to arrive with this party. And all of the women are in carriages except for Blanche, because we know that Blanche is like a fantastic horsewoman. And she comes riding up in this is now Elle Macpherson in this just like resplendent purple riding habit. She's wearing like a top hat, and it's this huge, long, royal purple velvet coat that comes all the way down over the horse. And it has this very distinctive, like V-shaped detail on the front, like this sort of in more of like a velvet, like a textured fabric. It's very striking because it's just this beautiful shade of purple.
And looks like a very expensive piece of costuming.
Yes. And clearly, this costume went to the BBC costume closet after they were done shooting, because in 1997, 1 year later, here she comes riding up on the horse. It's Blanche wearing the same dress.
I'm convinced at this point it's not the actual same dress.
It is the same dress.
I don't think it's the same.
It's the same dress.
I think they copied it.
No, they didn't have the budget to copy it. It is absolutely the same dress.
But the movie was okay.
There's a whole website showing all of the repeat costumes in every BBC period miniseries throughout history. There is a costume closet that exists somewhere that people just go and pick. Yes, but it clearly got donated to wherever these costumes go.
Okay.
It is the same dress.
Okay.
This is a well-known thing that dresses get reused over and over
Cool.
and over again in movies. It is the same dress.
Cool.
There's no question in my mind.
They probably would have had to alter it, though, because I don't think this woman is as tall as Elle Macpherson.
That's fair enough to say.
Yeah, and the top hat's different.
Yeah, I think the top hat is different.
Yeah.
So Blanche, right? She's very disappointed. She's not going to marry Rochester, blah, 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 blah. Again, when we talked about the 1996 version, we talked about how they added this little detail that was not in the movie, or that was not in the book, that really brought something to the movie, that really expanded our knowledge of the character. And in this version, they really tried to do that too. For some reason, they added, so Jane and Rochester have agreed to get married. Rochester is like, I'm going to take you shopping because you can't be my wife and wear your plain old governess dresses, which is something that happens in the book. So they go into town. There's this whole extended shopping sequence for no reason. And they run into Blanche for no reason and announce to her that they're getting married. And she's a little taken aback, but says, cool, because here's my new boyfriend, Rochester. And he's like, cool. And that's the end of the scene.
Yeah.
Maybe someone really felt attached to Blanche and wanted us to know that she was going to be okay with her new boyfriend.
I think I read that scene completely different than you're reading it.
I'm not reading it that way. I'm saying maybe that was someone's interpretation.
No, but that's what I'm saying. To me, it absolutely feels like the intention of the scene, their interpretation was Blanche has been mean to Jane Blanche needs to see that she's not going to get Rochester, and this is who Rochester is not going to marry her for. Like, I think they're trying to play it like the scene in Pretty Woman where she goes back.
It's his big mistake.
Yeah. Like, that to me is 100% how they're playing it.
That's fair. It's just like a Mean Girls thing.
Like, I don't think they want the audience to know that Blanche is going to be fine. I think they want the audience to know that Blanche did, in fact, get hurt by this. Like, she didn't get out of this unscathed.
It's like the most random scene. It's very strange. That's all I have.
Yeah. I want to end on this version
Okay.
with one nice thing.
Okay.
The veil scene.
Okay.
Which I talked extensively about in episode 1. We didn't talk about it here because it's not in the Zeffirelli version, but it is in this one. This is the best version of that scene
So unfortunate.
of any of them. It's the only one that's actually creepy, and it doesn't do the thing that I wanted to see in the book, which is that look, that really close-up look that is just so terrifying to me. It's not even that dark in the room. The thing is, the thing that wakes Jane up is the sound of dancing, of bare feet tippy-tapping up and down, and she looks and sees this woman in her like wedding veil just doing this really spastic, very, very fast dancing in place. It is fucking terrifying. And it's not what the book does, but it is legitimately creepy, is the only good thing I can say about it.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all I have.
Great.
Can we please move on?
Yeah, please.
Oh my God, this movie's terrible.
All right, so we're going to make a jump forward by almost 10 years.
Yeah.
And we are now in 2006.
This is our last mini-series.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this one was directed by Susanna White and written by Sandy Welch. I'm trying to figure out, for some reason that feels important, what I just said. I'm struggling to figure out why, though. Can you help me?
Yes. Do you think it is because they are women?
Yes. Oh, you've cracked it.
Do you think sometimes that stories about women are better when they're told by women?
I think they certainly can be and often are.
I said sometimes.
Yeah. So this one starred Ruth Wilson as Jane and Toby Stevens as Rochester. I want to get this out of the way.
Okay.
Especially in contrast with that last version we just talked about. This one's so good.
It's so good.
It's so fucking good.
And it's good without being book accurate.
Yeah.
It is taken by people that clearly loved the source material and were like, we're going to tell this story without feeling beholden to the exact text of the story.
Totally.
Which, as we have often said, is actually sometimes a hallmark of a good adaptation.
Yes.
Which is the spirit rather than the letter of the original work.
Here's an example.
Yes.
Here's the very first shot of the entire miniseries is a desert. It's like a girl in a desert, which now having watched at this point 6 different versions of Jane Eyre, I definitely was looking around going, did I
in a desert.
Did I fuck up? Is this not Jane Eyre? The credits said Jane Eyre, but it's because she's a little girl reading a book in Mrs. Reed's house and she's imagining. This is a miniseries that's willing to show her imagination and internal imagery, and it does it throughout.
Yeah.
Which is really, really nice. And that's a fucking choice. That's a really good choice where it's willing to stray.
So here's another example.
Yeah.
The way that the book works and every other version is that she gets this letter from Mrs. Fairfax that does not have very much information about what she's going to be doing and who all these characters are. So she gets there and she's like, oh yeah, your daughter. My daughter? Adele's not my daughter. Oh, okay. Yeah. And then later she mentions Mr. Rochester. Mr. Rochester? Who's Mr. Rochester? Oh, the owner of this house, of course. It's like, what? Of course, you've literally not told Jane anything. So that is annoying.
Yes.
That Jane has to ask all these questions to get this information and doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't say anything about Mrs. Fairfax or anything else.
Like, all it's done is through 6 versions, it's made us annoyed at Mrs. Fairfax for writing a terrible letter and ad.
But in this one, there is the shot of her reading the letter in the carriage.
Yep.
But what the letter says is, hello, I am Mrs. Fairfax, the housekeeper to Mr. Rochester, who is the owner of Thornfield Hall. His ward, Miss Adele, who is 10 years old, needs a governess, and we would love for you to please come and work for us.
Amazing.
That's all you need. Just very basic information.
It felt like it was one of those things where they did a thing I didn't know I so desperately wanted. Right. And I was so happy to get it. It's so good.
It's so good.
But can I just talk about 2 things that happen at Thornfield?
Yeah.
2 things that happen at Lowood before we get to Thornfield.
Yeah, go for it.
One was something you alluded to before, which was depicting her relationship with the other teachers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I talked about this in episode 1.
Yeah.
Which was that this was the first one that I just had this image of what it must have been like to go from student to teacher in that environment, because she just sort of mentions it and it's like, yeah, I was a student and then I became a teacher. But it's like the life of the teachers is depicted very clearly. Like, they sit in a different place. They sit up on the stage in the cafeteria where everybody's eating. And I was just imagining, like, how weird must that have been after 6 years or 8 years down amongst the rabble? Like, the first day, like, oh no, Jane, your place is up here now.
Like, she's all the way on the end.
Yeah.
Because she's
the most junior teacher.
Exactly, yeah. That's so good. And the only other thing I wanted to say about Lowood is this does my absolute favorite transition from young Jane to old Jane.
Okay.
This is the only one that, like, so I cry really easily, famously.
Famously.
This is not the only version where I cry. This is the only one that made me cry with this transition. In this we know that she's an artist. In this version, they do this beautiful thing, and I'm not going to do it justice by describing it, but she's basically drawing. She's out in the courtyard, in the like churchyard, basically, drawing in charcoal all of the little coffins they're taking away because of the typhus. Yeah. She's doing all of that, and then she tears off a page, and basically we see that picture, and the camera is zoomed in on that. And she tears off a page, and all we can see is the white of the page. And then suddenly a new hand comes in and paints like a stroke of green in paint. And we zoom out, and she's teaching art to little girls.
Yeah.
And it's Ruth Wilson suddenly.
Yeah.
And what they've done is they've taken something that's really central to the character of Jane Eyre and used that as like a vessel for the transition from young to old.
Yes.
And that I just think it's brilliant. I think it's perfect writing, and it's staged beautifully too. That was my favorite.
Yeah.
And because it was actually saying something about the character, that's what got me emotional in that moment.
Yeah, totally. So she leaves Lowood and she comes to Thornfield. And we see a couple of things that I don't think we've seen in any other version so far. So we talked about Adele previously, and there is this and I think, honestly, this little actress playing Adele, I just think she's too old, so it makes her I think she's 12 or 13 and she's supposed to be like 8, and it just makes her seem a little bit weirdly stunted because she's almost a teenager acting like this, but that's okay, fine, whatever. But there's a scene in the book where Adele is trying to show off, and so she says, can I sing and dance, because my mother showed me how to sing and dance. Can I sing the song that my mother taught me how to sing? And Jane says, yeah, sure.
She's like sitting there with Mrs. Fairfax, just meeting her.
And she gets up and sings this song that, because Jane understands French and Mrs. Fairfax doesn't, Jane is pretty scandalized because, well, can I actually just read the passage?
Sure.
She commenced singing a song from some opera. It was the strain of a forsaken lady who, after bewailing the perfidy of her lover, calls pride to her aid, desires her attendant to deck her in her brightest jewels and richest robes, and resolves to meet the false one that night at the ball, and prove to him, by the gaiety of her demeanor, how little his desertion has affected her. The subject seemed strangely chosen for an infant singer, but I suppose the point of the exhibition lay in hearing the notes of love and jealousy warbled with the lisp of childhood, and in very bad taste that point was. At least I thought so.
So how is this portrayed in this version? Because, like you say, that's not in any of the other ones.
It's not in any of the other ones.
Like, Adele might sing a song, but
they're not like, there's no reaction to it. It's just like, oh, she's like a little kid singing a French song. So she gets up and she sings the song. It's exactly as described. She's doing these gestures and things that have clearly been taught to her. And Mrs. Fairfax is like sort of blithely like clapping her hands and like just happily watching. And Jane's face, just her eye, because you see the subtitles of what she's saying, and it's kind of scandalous. It's basically as described. Jane's eyes just get really big and she's so scandalized, and just the contrast between her reaction because she understands the words and Mrs. Fairfax is so funny. There is a bunch of funny stuff in they have found humorous moments that I really appreciate.
But they're supposed to, like I was saying in episode 1, one of the things I really like is the way that the gothic stuff is juxtaposed with the stuff that isn't.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, this story on the page is not gothic horror the whole time.
Yeah.
There's funny and light things that happen throughout.
Yeah,
So
for
I'm
sure.
glad they embraced that.
And then the other thing I just wanted to mention quickly is Grace Poole is played by Pam Ferris,
Yeah.
who I love so much. I'm so obsessed with her. I recently started rewatching Call the Midwife from the beginning, and Pam Ferris's character isn't in it anymore. And I had like totally forgotten how much I love that character. And I think I'm just going to watch it up to the point that she leaves and then stop. Pam Ferris, I have mentioned on the show before, but most famously Miss Trunchbull from the Mara Wilson Matilda movie. That's how people know her mostly, but she's done a ton of British TV. Yeah. I just love Pam Ferris so much.
She's the sister in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban that Harry like blows up, and then she like she just expands and then floats away at the beginning of the movie.
Mara Wilson just has the most wonderful things to say about the experience of working with her as a child. Like, I just believe she's the most wonderful person.
She's great in this.
She's really good.
She's not as like creepy and severe as Billy Whitelaw is,
no,
but she's definitely not warm.
No.
Like even a little.
Yeah.
This one does the Detective Jane scene.
Yeah, for sure it does.
Like after the fire where Rochester has said like, well, Grace Poole set the fire. And she's like, well, why don't you get rid of her? He says, well, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And like afterwards, Jane is having this scene with her.
Like,
where
very
she's like,
suspicious, Grace.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a few questions?
And then like Grace Poole starts getting suspicious of her because as we find out, Grace Poole is the one who's taking care of the woman that no one knows about in the attic. And she's worried that she's going to find out that it was her.
Right.
It's just great.
It's great.
The scenes between the two of them are fantastic.
It's great.
We need to talk about Rochester.
Yeah.
He shows up. It is Toby Stephens. He is by far the sexiest Rochester.
Oh my God. This is by far the sexiest version.
Like, okay.
They have flaming hot chemistry between the two of them.
And it's great because we've seen two now. This is now the second where there is absolute great chemistry between the two leads, but it's totally different.
Yeah. Well, there's a sex scene. Like, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but it's interrupted. But like, there's a scene where they're in bed together and he is like pleasuring her.
Yeah. This one leans into it.
Yeah.
This one says like, okay, in the book it's subtext, in ours it's text.
Yeah.
He's so good in it. But they do a couple of things that are really, really smart about kind of selling her attraction to him.
Yeah.
So like they're showing her actions. They're not showing her attraction to him just by looking at him longingly.
Yeah. So this is, this little detail, it kills me. It kills me how sweet this is. They have this encounter and it's right before he brings Blanche and everybody back, and she like is into him. And she wakes up the next morning.
By the way, and I'm just sorry to interrupt, but like deservedly so.
Yeah.
Their conversations up until this point have been very steamy.
Yeah.
And he has been an incredibly kind person.
Yes.
While still being very, very severe and distant.
Yes.
Yeah.
So she wakes up the next morning and the sun is shining. And she is basically like, she has two dresses.
Yeah.
So she can't like put on her cutest clothes. So like, the only thing in the world that she can do to make herself beautiful is she has this like little piece of like red cloth and she like ties it around her neck in a jaunty manner.
And luckily it would look good with either of her dresses, which are in the colors of gray and dark gray.
Yeah. So this like little jaunty neckerchief that she like arranges for herself and comes down. And that's when she learns he's gone away and to stay with this other family, and oh, by the way, there's this beautiful woman named Blanche that he shall surely marry one of these days. And sort of the equivalent of the Charlotte Gainsbourg looking in the mirror, you're a fool scene is she like, you see her that evening and she basically like kind of rips it off her neck and like throws it down on the bed. But then like she keeps wearing it throughout the movie. She's like, I just want to be pretty. Like, it's so sweet. It's so sweet. It's the sweetest thing.
It's really good.
The little bow tie is just, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. This does do one thing that I don't like.
Okay.
And I really severely don't like it.
Okay.
It does have the thing with her leaving. So like in the Ciarán Hinds version, the night there's like one thing that happens between the two of them after she finds out about Bertha and before she leaves to the moor.
And that's, he abuses her physically.
Yes. In this version, they
may be boned.
So they definitely have a very intense kind of event that happens.
Yeah, well, I mean, we see that, and we only see it in flashback. We
Yeah.
don't see it when it's happening. We see her remembering.
Right.
And in her memory, they are fully clothed.
Yes, this is true.
I want to be very clear.
Speaking of memory, though, she goes through the moor and she gets picked up and the Riverses pick her up. She has amnesia?
Yeah. It's unclear whether she really does or she's making it up.
I don't think she's making it up because this story, the way they've done it up till this point, is they'll absolutely show what's going on in her head.
Yeah.
All I can say is based on the writing and based on the performance and the direction, she has amnesia.
Yeah.
She doesn't remember who she is.
Yeah.
And that, to me, I just think, even if she's faking it, I don't like it. Because here's the deal.
Yeah.
If she has amnesia, I think that's a cheat, and I think it's lazy writing.
Yeah.
If she doesn't have amnesia and she's lying to the Riverses about having amnesia, it actually goes against the character because the whole thing is about how honest and upfront she is. In the book, when they ask her name, she says that her name is Jane Elliott.
Yeah. And then she immediately says, I just want you to know that's not my name.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, she's a very honest person. One of the things they respond to is how honest she is. So I just don't like this as a choice because either way, it's something I don't like.
Yeah, and I don't, because like in many versions, she does say, my name is Jane Elliott, and it's a whole thing because St. John actually figures out who she is because she scribbles her name on a piece of paper and he sees it and he's looking for someone named Jane Eyre, and Eyre is actually his middle name because they're related. Anyways, this whole thing.
Yeah.
But I don't believe there's any single version that she says, I'm going to tell you my name is Jane Elliott, but it's not my name.
Yeah.
Which is what happens in the book.
Right.
Which I guess is not like great TV because then it kind of like loses a bit of the mystery. But the thing I did want to say about the reason that I was kind of thinking like maybe she's faking the amnesia is like, okay, so they've got her tucked up in bed. They're trying to care for her. They have her clothes because she's saying, I don't remember who I am. I don't remember my name. And they have her clothes and she's got like a little name tag that says like JE or something like that, like Lowood School. So they're like, oh, we could write to Lowood and try to find out who you are. And someone says, maybe, but you don't know that this is her. She may have stolen this dress. And Jane gets very indignant and says like, I'm not a thief. And St. John's like, how do you know? And I think there's sort of two interpretations, like either it's just her soul kind of rising up, like, because what she says is, she gets really confused. She's like, I don't remember who I am, but I know I'm an honest person. But I guess it's a question of whether that's what happened or whether she just kind of got tripped up because someone accused her of being a thief.
At the end of the day,
doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter because, like I said, either way, I don't like it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. So, okay, we have this intensely compatible couple.
Yes.
We've talked a lot about Rochester. And I think Toby Stephens is so good in this. He's definitely he's a little over the top in how gruff he is as a character, but that allows him to be really subtle in certain moments with how much he cares for her and in their conversations. What do you think about Ruth Wilson?
I think she's great. Like, I think that she has a really expressive face. Mm-hmm. So she's able to do a lot with listening, which is something Jane has to do a lot. I mean, the problem with...
Listen without being passive.
Yeah, exactly. Active listening.
Yeah.
Because the problem with Jane Eyre, of course, is that so much of the book happens inside her head. So how do you show that on TV without resorting to heavy voiceover? It literally has to be done in the face. I just think she does a great job. And like I said, like the chemistry between them is pretty electric.
It's intense.
Yeah, I mean, she's 24 and he's 37, so like it's a gap, but not like an insurmountable gap in terms of like a couple. Yeah, I really like her. I think she might be my favorite Jane.
Yeah?
Yeah.
More than Zella Clark?
Like she's
how much of it is the writing though?
I mean, a lot of it is the writing.
Yeah.
Because I love the writing in this so much because it's really fresh. Mm-hmm. Especially after watching 7 versions, to have someone come along who was like, no, we're not going to be bound just because in the book she doesn't get this vital information until after she arrives. Like, we're just going to think about it logically like humans rather than just being tied to this script and write a script where people act in the way that they might.
Yeah.
Like, I just really appreciate that.
Totally.
Like, if this was the only version that existed, it'd be like, oh, I'd love to see this book. But like, the Zella Clark one is my favorite strict interpretation for sure.
Sure.
And this is my favorite artistic interpretation, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then 96 is your favorite movie interpretation.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it does things that only a movie can do.
I just love that they bone down in this so much.
It's really good.
It's so good.
It's really good.
Because they do at the end again, too. Like, they're like on a blanket by the river.
While he's blind.
While he's blind, it's hot.
I only have one note from that part of the movie when, like, so she's telling him all about the Riverses and about St. John and everything, and he has a moment, and this is in most versions, and it's in the book, where he's like jealous of this young, handsome
guy. And she's
guy.
like trying to make him jealous to kind of snap him out of his depression.
And she says to him, and this is from the book, he says, he's probably not handsome. And she says, he's more handsome than you.
Yeah.
And my note is just bullshit.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, he is 100% not more handsome than Toby Stephens. It's just not a thing.
It's not a thing.
But I want to talk about what happens at the very, very end.
Okay.
This killed me.
Yeah, you died. You died on the couch.
Killed me dead. We talked before about how the thing that she wants more in life than anything is a family.
Yes. We've
seen it handled the way it is in the book, which is she finds out she has money and her reaction is like, oh, okay, this makes me uncomfortable. And she finds that she has a family and, oh, this makes me so happy.
Yes.
We've seen it not really handled well at all. We've seen it handled well in a really different way and a small way, which they did in Zeffirelli's version with the letter. This goes the completely opposite direction. This is the most overt interpretation of that desire. In this version, it ends. She now has cousins, and she has a husband, and they've had 2 little kids. And there's a scene, I'm going to try not to cry. There's a scene where they're all where they're all somewhere, and they're all walking. It's very cinematic. Like, it's not realistic at all. It's very cinematic, but these characters are all coming together, and one by one, the camera is revealing new characters that are all walking with them to a bench.
Including all the servants, Mrs. Fairfax, Adele, everybody. Like, no one is left out. Jeremy's crying.
And they get to the bench, and they're all sitting down to have their portrait painted.
Yes.
Which, that's not how that works.
No.
Like, that's an invention of cinema.
Also, the guy painting the portrait is so far away to get them all in the shot. He's like on the other side of the river.
Like, all it reminded me of was the scene in History of the World Part 1 when Da Vinci shows up to paint The Last Supper. Like, that's not how it works.
Yeah, it's fine.
But it is the most perfect, if incredibly overt, representation of her desire that more than anything she wants a family.
Yeah.
And she gets a family.
Well, the thing I wanted to mention too is that in terms of movie making, this is in direct contrast with a scene earlier in the movie. One of the very first scenes of the movie is her in the home of the Reeds, Mrs. Reed and her 3 children, and they're getting their portrait painted as a family. Mm-hmm. And she's like sitting in the he's like sniffling.
Shut up.
And she's like sitting in the window seat reading a book, and the painter turns around and sees her and says, "Oh, little girl, like, you should be in the portrait too." And John Reed says, "Ugh, that's Jane Eyre. She's not part of this family." Like, it's very overt, and it's a little bit ridiculous how overt it is. But then at the end, it's in direct contrast, and also what you see is everyone is included. All of the servants, everyone that she's ever talked to, like, everyone is included. No one is left out, because that is the kind of family that she wants to make for herself. Jeremy's tears are dropping on the microphone.
I won't be able to read this, but can you read my only note about this scene that I wrote down?
Jeremy wrote in all caps, "She gets a family, I'm dying."
That was my only note. I love this one. It's so good.
Yes.
So good.
Do you want to move on?
No, but let's do it.
Have you stemmed your tears?
Yes, I think I feel better.
Have you staunched the flow?
Yes. All right. So then we move ahead 5 years to our last Jane Eyre of 8. Holy shit, right?
It's so many.
This took us a long time.
So many.
Thankfully, this one wasn't a miniseries, and this one was just a movie.
It was actually pretty short.
And I'm thankful for 2 reasons. One, it was so that we didn't have to watch too much Jane Eyre, but
2,
also
it wasn't that good.
Oh my God. Like, okay. This was directed by Cary Fukunaga, who also directed famously the first season of True Detective.
Gotcha.
Which, full disclosure, neither of us have ever seen. I have heard it is amazing. It's on my list. I will watch it. He's also, like, at least at this point, I feel like well known for not directing 2 other movies. He was gonna direct It.
Okay.
Which he didn't. He's a producer on it, but he didn't direct it. Someone else ended up directing it, and it ended up turning out really good. He's also gonna be directing the next James Bond movie.
Okay.
Which I am interested to, based on everything I've heard about this guy and his kind of travels through the industry. I will be surprised if it does turn out that he directs it.
Yeah.
But at least at this point, he is engaged to direct that movie. It's written by Moira Buffini.
Okay.
This script was on the 2008 Brit list, which is like...
It's like the Blacklist.
Yeah, it's like the Blacklist, but for British screenplays.
Sure.
Like the best unproduced British screenplays.
Yeah.
And then it did get produced. I don't understand why. Like, I think I get it. Like, I think I know why people thought it was a really good screenplay. I am going to take a stand and say that it is not, in fact, a good screenplay.
I see what it was trying to do. And I think the thing that frustrated you a lot was it was trying to do something that you had been saying, I wish someone would do this.
Yeah.
And it tried, and it didn't do a good job.
Like, at all.
At all.
Well, okay, so here's the thing that I thought. It wasn't that, like, I said, this is how you should do Jane Eyre.
No, you were just like, I'd love to see a version that did this.
I want to see a version, I said. I want to see a version that tells the whole story in flashbacks.
Yeah.
Where the present day is her with the Riverses, and the flashback is everything that happens up till that point. The stuff in Lowood and the stuff at Thornfield.
And then you kind of meet back up in the present.
Exactly. This one does that.
Yeah,
like this
that's
one,
exactly what it does.
This one starts with her leaving Thornfield and coming upon the Riverses. And I remember, like, they're doing my idea. This is so exciting.
Well, it's funny because when you had said, I would like to see that, I was like, oh, you're going to get your wish. Because I had seen this movie. Like, I saw it in the theater.
I want to show you my notes. These are my first 2 notes for this version.
Bullet point 1, they're doing my idea. Bullet point 2, they're fucking up my idea.
Yeah, they do it badly.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing in this one is there is so... Okay, I'm going to say this. I could be wrong. It seems like there is so little thought given to what causes the transition to happen between the present day and the flashback.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that was sort of my thing, which was if you hadn't read the book or know the story or had seen any previous version, you would not know what the fuck was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as you say, there's no transition and no consistency between when we're in present and when we're in flashback. And there was one point where we thought we were in like a flashback of a flashback, but then it turned out we were in the present again.
Yeah.
Like it was not confusing. Because this is the 8th version of this we had seen and we had read the book. So it actually, to say it was confusing would be disingenuous because it wasn't. We were never really confused. But if you didn't know the story, you would absolutely be confused if this was your first exposure to Jane Eyre.
Yeah, it's like intentionally being confusing.
Yeah.
I don't understand that. There's just, so here's the first in my list of things that I didn't like. Oh, okay, and to back up for a second, this is starring Mia Wasikowska as Jane and Michael Fassbender as Rochester.
Yes.
Famously handsome Michael.
Classically handsome.
Yes.
Greek statue handsome, even though I hate Michael Fassbender. Like, he has a classic Roman nose.
Do you hate him, or he just, like, does not do it for you even a little?
He doesn't do it for me, and I guess he's never played any part that I found him appealing. He seems to always play really creepy people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he played Magneto, and you love Ian McKellen, and maybe that's another reason you don't like him.
I don't like him.
Yeah. Okay. Here's a thing, an example of, I think, the screenplay not understanding the book,
yes.
which is something that's come up on the show before.
I have one too, but you do yours first.
So when she's at Lowood and she's talking with Helen has recently been struck by one of the teachers. And Jane is talking to her, and this is from the book, where Jane says to her, if she tried to hit me with that, I would have taken it from her hand and I would have hit her.
With a stick.
With a stick.
Like a stick.
And in the book, Helen says, no, you wouldn't have done that. Helen's a little bit older. Yeah. She's a little bit wiser. And she says, no, you wouldn't have done that. And it's so good for Jane's growth as a character and her growth as a child, because what she's having someone say is that you're in charge of your own actions.
Right.
And there's a difference between being good and being bad, and you have to decide what that is. And there are going to be things you're going to do and things you won't do.
Well, and also, like, and your actions have consequences, which you know. And if you think about it, if you hit a teacher, you would be kicked out of the school, and then you would have nowhere to go. And how would you get your education? Like, she sort of takes her through this whole thing of, isn't it better to put up with things for the benefit that you're going to get, which is that you will be educated.
Right. In this version, Helen's immediate response is she'd get another.
Yeah.
So basically, she's trying to instill nihilism in little Jane. Like, she's telling her nothing matters.
Right.
Like, Jane has to find all these things out for herself. She learns nothing from Helen. And in fact, I think that's a lesson that's detrimental to her upbringing, basically. So that just fundamentally doesn't get their relationship in the book.
Yeah. Well, the example that I have is a little bit smaller. It's literally just a word.
Mhm.
But I think it, again, really points to... I just hate it when it seems like a screenwriter didn't understand the material or didn't connect enough with the material to really think about what it means. Not to say they're not smart enough to understand, but that it just they didn't have that deep connection with it. So there's a line in the book, and it's in many of the other versions, that Rochester and Jane are talking about the difference between informality and insolence. And he says, like, I hope you won't mistake my informality for insolence. And she says, no, not at all. She says, one I kind of like, because they've just been talking about the fact that he pays her a salary. So she's sort of beholden to him. She says, insolence, nothing freeborn would put up with, even for a salary. And he laughs in her face, rightly so, and says, you are extremely innocent of the world. Most things freeborn would put up with anything for a salary.
Yeah.
But what an interesting thought. That what a strange and unusual response that you gave that shows that you have a very interesting character. Like that's what the conversation is. But in this, they have this exact same conversation, but what Jane says to Rochester is, nothing freeborn should put up with insolence for a salary. But his line is the same. Most things freeborn would put up with anything for a salary. And it's like, but that's actually not a response to what she said. She said should, meaning people do, but they shouldn't.
Right.
And he says, yeah, like he does the same, like, oh, you sweet summer child, but he's actually not responding to the words that came out of her mouth. She said should. I don't know if it was just a mistake that nobody caught, if it was in the screenplay, but it is someone somewhere not understanding what words mean and having a conversation at total cross purposes that kind of, as you said, is supposed to reveal something about the character, but actually doesn't. It only reveals something about the filmmaker's view of the world and is actually detrimental to our view of the character.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think about what the devil's advocate of this would be, where let's say they were very intentional about changing that.
Yeah.
And let's say what they were trying to do was make it so that Jane is being set up as wiser than he is, where he's talking about what someone would do. She is going to immediately cut to what's most important, which is, regardless of what people would do, no one should do that.
Right.
And he is going to ignore this wise comment and sidestep the issue to make himself sound smarter. So maybe it builds up her intelligence. That's the thing.
That's the only possible explanation, but it doesn't make sense. I don't think that's what they're doing.
But if that's what they're doing, does any of the other rest of the movie support that? No. So at best, they squandered something. Yeah. So
and at worst, they're dumb. You know, this.
I feel like I need to talk about this.
Okay.
And it comes up throughout. Mia Wasikowska's performance in this movie. I know, I feel really bad for the stuff we're going to say.
And part of the reason I feel bad is that we listened to a little bit of an interview with her, and she was so thoughtful. She was only 20, she was only 22. He was 34. So again, not the right age.
It's hard for me to accept that Michael Fassbender was ever younger than me.
Yeah.
That's hard for me.
That's fair. But we did listen to a bit of an interview with her talking about how first of all, how honored she was to play this character.
Yes.
How much she loves the story, which I absolutely believe.
Yeah. And
how thoughtful she was about what she was trying to do, because she says all the right things. She says she says it's a first person story, so it all happens in Jane's head. So you have to do so much to try to express what's happening inside her head. So I can only imagine one of two things.
Yeah.
Much like Jane talking about how the vision of her paintings, her talent could not quite achieve what her vision was in her head. Perhaps this very young actress's talent, though she was very smart, perhaps her acting talent did not quite match the vision she had in her head for what her performance would or should be. 2, essentially her thoughts about this character were directed out of her. And that's kind of what I'm leaning towards based on some of the things that we listened to a little bit of an interview with the director too. And he seems a little deluded about what he himself has put on screen.
I do think that Cary Fukunaga, an impression I get, I'm not going to say he's his own biggest fan. I do think he's a pretty big fan of himself, though.
Oh, I got that impression for sure.
Yeah, like I say this as a film school kid, like an ex-film school kid.
Yeah.
He strikes me as like the worst kind of film school kid.
Yeah.
Which is a film school kid with talent.
Yeah.
Which I can't necessarily say about myself.
Oh,
but like,
let's say I don't think that's true at all. I'm sorry. I kind of railroaded what you were going to say about Mia Wasikowska.
No, that's okay. I agree with you. I think I think it's the second one. I think he directed it out of her.
I agree with you 100%.
I think they were going for something. They were going for a Jane that is very passive and is always observing. But the only problem is it doesn't matter what they're going for, because if you're going to give a Jane who's a blank slate, you're going to get nothing as an audience from her.
Yeah.
And she's the main character. She, more than any other character in this, you as an audience are supposed to have an emotional relationship with her. I feel nothing for her.
Yeah.
I have a note where it says, like, Jane's just woken up at Thornfield for the first time. I feel no emotional connection to her at all.
Yeah.
Does nothing. Like, they do the scene where Adele sings the song, and Mia's just sitting there looking at her with no look on her face whatsoever.
Yeah, yes.
It does nothing.
Yeah.
Like, it proves nothing. It doesn't further anything. I don't see the point of it. What are her... There's one scene where she says what her hopes and dreams are. Do you remember that?
Kind of.
She's like looking out a window going, these are the things I want for my life. It's the only thing we get of her actually having any internal wants and desires, and he simply externalizes them by having her say, then this is as much the screenwriter's fault.
Yeah.
I'd say more the screenwriter's fault.
Like,
Like, just has her externalize it, says it in 15 seconds, and we as an audience are supposed to go, cool.
Okay, cool.
We'll take those, put them in our back pocket, and we'll remember those for later. I hate that.
Yeah.
I hate that.
Well, the other thing that I think we really need to talk about as far as the director is we listened to an interview with him from the sort of DVD commentary or whatever.
Yeah.
That he was saying, no one's ever done Jane Eyre like this. People think of this as a love story, and it is a horror story. And we are going to play up the horror elements like no one's ever done before. And sure enough, if you watch the trailer, it looks like...
like a thriller.
Yeah, it looks like a thriller.
Mm-hmm. Two things.
Yes, go ahead.
One, fuck you. Other people have figured that out.
Yes.
I want to be really clear. We have had up till this point gothic horror. We've had overt like romance. We've had very many different versions of it. So first of all, bullshit.
Well, I also love the idea that he thinks in 2010 or whenever he gave that interview that this man in 2010 was the first person to ever have that observation that there's elements of horror stories in this book, Jane Eyre. Like, he is not the first person to make that observation.
But then number two.
Yes.
If that was your goal, Carrie, you fucked up.
You did not succeed.
You completely dropped the ball. Here's a couple of things. One, like, there's nothing horrific about anything that goes on. There's always been multiple scenes in the book. There's the laugh, which is super creepy, and then there's the fire, which is really scary for Jane. That's always two different scenes. So there's like a growing sense of foreboding in the story. Like the events escalate, right? In this, that's the same scene. She hears no laugh when she gets to the house. But one night she hears a laugh, goes out, and the fire's happening. Yep. So there's no escalation. It just suddenly happens.
Well, you know why they had to do it that way? Because they cut Grace Poole.
That's another problem with it. Like, Grace Poole, she shows up at the end.
For like a second, but she is not a character.
We never hear her name at all throughout the whole thing. But then they also cut the veil scene. It's not the first one that cuts it, but it's the first one that cuts it where the director said, I want to embrace the horror in this.
Yes.
They shot it. It's a deleted scene. They shot the whole thing with her in the room tearing the veil. By the way, not scary even a little. It's like the least horrific of all of the versions. And then they cut the scene of Jane telling Rochester about it. At the end of the day, I don't understand what anyone making this movie thought they were bringing to the material. Yeah. It doesn't do any aspect of this story better than any other version that we watched. It's nothing. It's white paint.
No, I remember.
Is that unfair?
It's not unfair because I remember going to see it in theater when it came out, and I remember being excited about it. And I just remember leaving the theater going like, that was nothing. It was nothing. Like, I didn't even hate it. It was just nothing.
Totally. I have, like, my last note for this whole thing is no passion, no chemistry, so boring.
Yeah, it was just boring. It was very boring.
And that's not the only time I wrote so boring in all of my notes.
Yeah.
It just did nothing for me. There was nothing engaging about it. The only thing that kept me going through to the end is the fact that we were watching it for the show.
Yeah.
And I wanted to see how they were going to do things. So going back to it being on the Brit list, I literally think the only reason it's on the Brit list is because of the idea that it's told in flashback.
Yeah.
That's it.
I think you're right.
But even that's
But
fucked up.
You had that idea.
Like that's just an idea. That's an idea. It's idea isn't enough to be good. Execution is what makes something good.
Yeah.
So the idea is there, but then even that fucks it up because they show the entire prologue again. Do you remember this?
Yeah, they show that. Yes.
Like her leaving Thornfield and going through the moors and getting found by the rivers.
No,
because
well,
then when it finally happens, they have to show it again.
No, because I made a joke that I was like, are we in like like are we just gonna see the whole like I thought we were gonna have to maybe see the whole thing again to get all the way back to where we were.
Like, is it even worth talking about? Like, Judi Dench is in this movie.
Yeah, no, the scene where she goes back to Thornfield and it's burned down and Judi Dench is just like randomly standing there to give her the information about how the thing burned down. Like, it's a nice scene between the two of them, but it's like, why is she standing there in the ruins just waiting for you to come back? It's so strange.
Yeah.
It is like just one of the least thoughtful versions I think we've seen, and the most just like a prime example of a director just being up his own butt. And like because I blame this like 95% on the director. The screenplay is also not good, but like the director just directed anything interesting out of it. I don't think he he just didn't seem to know what he was doing.
It's just...
I never want to see a man tell this story ever again. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Franco Zeffirelli did a really good job.
But
I guess that exists.
It exists.
We don't need another one of those.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Like if we're going to bring something new to it, like let's do what they did with the Ruth Wilson version and actually bring something new to it.
One thing I wrote down, and it's another thing about like how up his own butt he is. I wrote my note is this movie is beautiful. But I wrote it but beautiful with a capital B.
Yeah.
It's like beautiful the way beautiful movies are now.
Yes.
The way a film student thinks of it, which is like, I know this is going to get, now I'm getting into the shit that like a lot of people don't care about, but like shallow depth of field, do you know what I'm talking about? Where like only a very, very small sliver of something is in focus and anything behind that person is like grossly out of focus and everything. There's lots of close-ups on texture and things like that. That's what a lot of people consider beautiful, but it doesn't actually advance the storytelling at all.
Right.
Like good cinematography. I go back to the Zeffirelli version. That movie is stunning.
Yeah.
But it's not doing any tricks. It's just photographed beautifully, and it's photographed in a way that serves the story.
Yes.
It's photographed in a way that, other than being beautiful, doesn't draw attention to itself.
Yeah.
This one is distracting in the way it's shot.
Yes.
It's constantly pulling you away from the characters. It's constantly pulling you away from the story. I just found it so pretentious.
Yeah, it was pretentious and boring. Which Jane Eyre is not neither.
No.
Like, the story is not pretentious, nor is it boring. Like, those are two things you could not say about the book.
I was not ready for how angry this one made me. I was offended as a viewer by how little it was saying and how little it was giving me.
Well,
the only other... No, sorry.
Well, just especially because we were just on this home stretch. It's like, yes, one more and we're going to be done. And it was such a pain to get through.
Like, I wanted to have this one end and be able to turn to you and say triumphantly, we did it! We watched 8 versions! This is great! And it ended, and I turned to you and I said, oh my God, we did it.
Yeah.
We did it. Finally. It's like, it's what I imagine running a marathon is, and you hit the wall, and you just gotta power through and get there. I'm not a runner. I've run a couple of times for like half a mile. I've moved quickly. I've had times in my life where I've moved quickly.
You shuffled.
Yes. But I'm curious to know from runners whether they think the last mile is their favorite mile of the entire race. This movie is just nothing. One last thing I want to say about it is just when Rochester begins to profess his love to her, it doesn't sound like love. Like Ciarán Hinds, it sounds like he wants to wear her skin.
Because Michael Fassbender is so creepy.
He's really creepy in this one. And Mia Wasikowska is nothing.
Yeah.
I guess one last thing I'll say about Michael Fassbender being handsome. He's especially handsome when you compare him to St. John in this version.
Oh. Oh, sweet St. John.
Right?
Sweet, sweet Billy Elliot.
He's the only version of St. John who's adorable.
Yeah.
Jamie Bell is super cute.
Yeah.
But he's not tall and handsome.
No.
And like Grecian in how he looks, or I guess Roman is what I'm thinking.
No, he's not.
He's
just a tiny man.
Oh my God. Reader, we hated it.
Yeah.
Well, we got to do some quadrants.
Oh my gosh, we've been recording for so long that I completely forgot about our quadrants. Let's take it back.
1943.
Yes.
Do you think that they cared about Jane Eyre, the material?
No.
No, I don't think so either.
Absolutely not.
Did they do a good job?
For the time,
Yes.
yes.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think this is a successful
we
movie.
didn't enjoy it, but for the time, I think they did a good job.
I went looking for something it didn't give me, but it still is like an effective movie.
Yeah.
It's effective filmmaking.
Yeah.
1970
Yes.
TV movie. Do you think they cared about the source material?
No.
No, I don't think so. Is it successful?
No.
No. It's got like one moment or two that are good, and George C. Scott is compelling, and Susanna York is very pretty, but like, it's not good.
It's not good.
1973 miniseries. Do you think they cared?
I think they must have.
I think so.
I think any mini, like, I don't know. Yes, I think they did care.
Not necessarily, but like care was taken for certain things that wouldn't necessarily have been care would have been taken for if they didn't care.
Yeah.
I think they cared. Is it successful?
Yeah, definitely.
I think so.
For
I
sure.
think it's a successful one.
Yeah.
1983. Do you
Yes.
think they cared?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is it successful?
Yes.
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 She's still my favorite Jane. Zella Clark is still my
She's
favorite
great.
Jane. Not necessarily my favorite way that Jane is written.
No, that's fine.
But she's my favorite. 1996.
Yes.
I don't know if they
I don't know if
cared.
they did either. That's what I was going to say. Like, I think this might be controversial. I don't know if Franco Zeffirelli had a deep, abiding relationship with the story Jane Eyre.
I don't think so.
I don't think he did, but like he understood it really well, and he made a beautiful movie.
It is the best movie of Jane Eyre that we watched.
Yeah.
And I would argue with anyone who thinks it isn't the best version, period.
Yeah.
Because any other version has these huge flaws that this one does not have.
Yeah.
And anyway, I thought it was absolutely successful. 1997 TV movie. Do you think they cared?
No, I do not.
No. Do you think it's successful?
Oh my God. This was the worst one.
This is 100% the worst one.
Yeah, this was painful. And I'm only glad because I actually thought it was a miniseries when we sat down to watch it. Because like it always pops up whenever I want to watch like a British miniseries, like under recommendations.
Sure.
And it was only a movie, which I'm so thankful for because if it had been a miniseries, it would have been so long.
Totally worth watching for that kiss alone.
Yeah.
That kiss is amazingly terrible.
Just fast forward to find it.
Oh my God. 2006 miniseries.
Yes.
Do you think they cared?
Yes, deeply.
Maybe more
the
than
most.
anyone?
I think the most, yeah.
Did they do a good job? This, like, here's the deal. By our own measure, this is now the best version.
Yeah.
Because they cared and it's great.
Yeah.
I do think the Zeffirelli is the best movie.
Yeah.
But this is the best version of
I think
Jane
that's
Eyre.
fair.
2011. Do you think they
No.
cared?
I would be willing to accept the argument that the screenwriter cared. Like, I would be willing to accept that she was like, I love Jane Eyre and I want to do something different with it.
I would accept that.
I don't know that that's true, but I would be willing to accept it. I don't think the director gave a shit. I blame this on the director. I hated him.
I do think I can't remember this specifically, but I think he said like his first experience of Jane Eyre was the Orson Welles version.
Great.
And that I think says a lot.
Yeah.
I do imagine he reread the book for it. I just don't think he got the right stuff out of it.
I don't think so either.
I don't think he cared. Did they do a good job? No. It's not as like intensely awful as 1997 was.
Boring.
It's nothing.
Yeah.
It's a nothing movie.
Yeah.
It's I would argue with people if anyone thinks it's really good, it's good by default.
Yeah.
It's good because it's a modern interpretation and it's very technically proficient.
Like unlike 97, there was nothing in it that we were looking at each other going like, this is awful.
Yeah.
So yeah, by default, as you say.
Like it's got Judi Dench in it.
Sure.
So Judi Dench movies are good, so it's good by default.
Yeah, well.
Yeah. So it bums me out that we end on that one.
Yeah, it's too bad.
And yet here we are. Finally done with this marathon. I'm curious to know what people thought of our two-parter here.
Yeah, I feel like this might be like an unexpected one to do a two-parter on. Like you would think we would have done a two-parter on something maybe, I don't know, more famous.
Yeah, but I think it's something you care about deeply.
Yeah, and also
we had a lot to say.
We had a lot to say, and there were so many miniseries. It was a lot of miniseries.
Yeah. Someone brought up Hamlet as something that like we could do at some point in the future. I think that's like the only other thing I can think of that would also merit a two-parter.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, this has been Adapter Parish. If you'd like to find us online, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at AdaptCast. And if you tweet about the show, don't forget to use the AdaptCast hashtag. You can join our groups on Facebook and Goodreads, and you can also find and follow me on Letterboxd. If you have anything to say that's longer than a tweet, you can always send an email to adapterparishcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, there are 2 great ways you can do it. First, tell a friend. Second, a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice would be greatly appreciated.
Reader, we did it.
We did it.
8 Jane's Eyre.
Oh my God. Can we not do Jane Eyre next week?
Let's not do it again.
Yay.
Bye.
Bye.